Hey, lady, stop right there. Where are this child's parents? Have you ever wondered what happened after she stood there? The story behind it is surprising. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Sarah Jenkins watched the scene with a mix of anxiety and determination. Her dark fingers were tightly intertwined with those of her adopted son, Ethan, a fair-skinned, blonde-haired boy who had just turned 5. The contrast between them was visible, but for Sarah, it was just another reminder of the miracle that had transformed her life 5 years ago. As they walked down the gleaming mall corridor, Sarah couldn't help but notice the curious glances, some discreet, others not so much. It was something she had grown accustomed to over the years, yet it still caused a tightness in her chest. Each look was a silent reminder that, in the eyes of many, her family didn't fit the conventional mold. The aroma of cinnamon and sugar lingered in the air, wafting from a nearby bakery. Ethan tugged at Sarah's hand, his blue eyes shining with longing. "Mommy, can we get a pretzel? Please." Sarah smiled, unable to resist that look. "Of course, sweetie. But first, let's go to the toy store as we promised, okay?" As they headed towards the toy store, Sarah didn't notice the woman watching them from a distance. Linda Pearson, a middle-aged woman with perfectly arranged gray hair and a tweed ensemble that screamed affluent suburb, couldn't take her eyes off the unusual pair. Something about the scene bothered her deeply, a persistent itch in her consciousness that she couldn't ignore. Linda approached a mall security guard, a tall, muscular man named Mike, who looked bored at his post near the central fountain. The soft sound of the falling water provided an ironic counterpoint to the tension about to unfold. "Excuse me," she said, her voice low but urgent. "There's something I think you should check out." Mike raised an eyebrow, suddenly alert. "What would that be, ma'am?" Linda hesitated for a moment, aware of the weight of her next words. "There's a black woman with a white child. He doesn't seem to be her son. I think we should check to make sure everything's okay." The guard frowned, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "Ma'am, are you sure? We can't just approach people based on—" "Please," Linda interrupted, her voice now firmer. "It's better to be safe than sorry, isn't it? What if it's a kidnapping?" Reluctantly, Mike nodded and began moving toward Sarah and Ethan. Linda followed at a discreet distance, her heart racing with a mix of apprehension and what she told herself was civic concern. Sarah sensed it before she saw it, a subtle change in the atmosphere, a tension spreading through the air like static electricity. Her eyes turned to the approaching security guard, and she instinctively pulled Ethan closer. The boy, unaware of the growing tension, was absorbed in a window display full of toy cars. "Excuse me, ma'am," Mike said, his voice professional but tense. "May I speak with you for a moment?" Sarah nodded, feeling the curious eyes of the people around her. The murmur of conversations quieted, as if the entire mall was holding its breath. "Yes, of course. Is there a problem?" Mike looked uncomfortable, his eyes shifting between Sarah and Ethan. "Well, we received a concern about you and the boy. Could you explain your relationship with him?" The words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. She had been through this before, but it never stopped hurting. It never stopped making her feel like an intruder in her own life. Taking a deep breath, she replied, "This is my son, Ethan. I adopted him when he was a baby." Ethan, sensing the tension in the air, looked up at Sarah with wide eyes. "Mommy, why is the man asking about us?" Ethan's innocent question echoed in the silence that had formed around them. Sarah felt a wave of protection rise within her. No matter how many times she faced prejudice, the need to protect her son always outweighed any other feeling. Linda, who had been watching the scene closely, began to feel the first pangs of doubt. The way Ethan clung to Sarah, the evident love in his eyes. It was clear they were mother and son. A sense of shame began to spread through her chest, mixed with a growing horror at what she had set in motion. Mike, realizing the situation, began to apologize. "I'm sorry, ma'am. It seems there's been a misunderstanding." It was at that moment that Linda, driven by a mix of guilt and the need to right her wrong, stepped forward. I'm sorry," she stammered, her face red with embarrassment. "I thought I shouldn't have assumed." Sarah looked at Linda, her eyes filled with a complex mixture of emotions: hurt, anger, exhaustion. Years of microaggressions and veiled prejudices seemed to converge on this moment. "No," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You shouldn't have assumed. Do you have any idea how much this hurts? How much it hurts my son?" Sarah's words hung in the air, heavy with emotion. The mall, once a scene of carefree shopping, had become a stage for a very real and painful drama. Ethan, still confused by the situation, tugged at Sarah's sleeve. "Mommy, why is this lady sad? Did we do something wrong?" Ethan's innocent question was like a knife in Sarah's heart. She knelt to be at his level, aware of everyone's eyes on them but focused only on her son. "No, my love, we didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes people make mistakes. But the important thing is that we love each other, right?" Ethan smiled and hugged Sarah tightly. "Yes, I love you, Mommy." Ethan's spontaneous hug seemed to break something inside Linda. Tears began to form in her eyes, and she felt the full weight of her actions. "I'm really sorry," she said, her voice choked. I never thought about how my actions could affect someone like this. I was so foolish, so prejudiced." Sarah stood up, still holding Ethan close. She looked at Linda, and for a moment, she saw beyond the woman who had caused so much pain. She saw someone who was facing her own prejudices for the first time, someone who might learn and change. "I hope you learn from this," Sarah said, her voice firm but not unkind. "Families come in all shapes and colors. Love is what matters." The incident had drawn a small crowd. Some looked on with sympathy, others with shame for having had thoughts similar to Linda's. Mike, the security guard, looked deeply uncomfortable, torn between his professional duty and his growing understanding of the mistake he had made. Sarah picked Ethan up, feeling the need to hold him close, to protect him from a world that sometimes seemed so cruel and incomprehensible. "Come on, sweetie. We still have a toy store to visit." As they walked away, Linda stood behind, tears now freely running down her face. The mall, once a place of carefree fun, had become the scene of a powerful lesson about prejudice and family love. And for Linda, it was the beginning of a journey of self-reflection she had never imagined she would take. In the days that followed, Sarah couldn't shake the incident at the mall from her mind. Every detail seemed etched in her memory: the stares, the words, the momentary fear that someone might try to take Ethan from her. It was a fear she had carried with her since the day she adopted him, a fear that many didn't understand but was all too real for her. A week after the incident, Sarah was sitting on her porch, a cup of tea cooling beside her, as she watched Ethan play in the yard. His laughter echoed through the air, a constant reminder of the joy he had brought into her life. It was then that she noticed an unfamiliar car pulling up in front of her house. Linda Pearson stepped out of the car, looking nervous and out of place. She stood still for a moment, clearly gathering her courage before approaching the house. Sarah felt her body tense, a mix of conflicting emotions rising within her. "Hello," Linda said softly when she was close enough. I was hoping we could talk." Sarah looked at her for a long moment before slowly nodding. "Ethan, sweetie," she called, "why don't you go play in your room for a while?" Ethan looked curiously at Linda but obeyed, running inside the house. Sarah gestured to a chair on the porch for Linda, who sat down with evident gratitude. "I've spent the whole week thinking about what happened," Linda began, her voice trembling. "I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on work. All I could think about was the look in Ethan's eyes, the pain in your eyes." Sarah remained silent, letting Linda continue. "I grew up in a small town," Linda went on. "Everyone looked like me, thought like me. I never really had to think about race or prejudice. It was easy to pretend those things didn't exist." Sarah nodded slowly. "It's easy not to see a problem when it doesn't affect you directly." Linda swallowed hard. "Yes, exactly. And then, when I saw you and Ethan at the mall, something inside me reacted. It wasn't rational, it wasn't fair, but it was real. And now I realize how dangerous that kind of thinking is, how much it hurts innocent people." "This wasn't the first time we've faced something like this," Sarah said softly. "And it probably won't be the last." Linda looked horrified. "Does this happen often?" Sarah shrugged. "The stares are constant. The questions, the assumptions. Some people are more subtle, others more direct. But it's always there, this feeling that we need to justify ourselves, to prove that we're a real family." Sarah's words seemed to hit Linda deeply. I never thought about it that way. It must be exhausting." "It is," Sarah agreed. "But Ethan is worth every second. He's my son in every way that matters." Linda was silent for a moment, absorbing Sarah's words. "I want to change," she said finally. "I want to be better, do better. But I don't know where to start." Sarah looked at Linda, seeing the sincerity in her eyes. "Acknowledging the problem is the first step," she said. "Many people don't even get that far. The next step is to educate yourself, to listen to the experiences of people different from you, and to be willing to challenge your own assumptions." Linda nodded vigorously. "I want to do that. I want to understand better. Do you think we could talk more? Maybe you could tell me more about your experience as an adoptive mother." Sarah hesitated for a moment. Part of her wanted to refuse, to protect herself and Ethan from more potential pain. But another part recognized the opportunity before her, the chance to educate, to change perspectives, to make a real difference. "All right," Sarah said finally. "But with one condition. I want you to use this experience not just to change yourself, but to educate others. When you hear someone making assumptions like you did, I want you to speak up." Linda agreed immediately. "I promise. I want to be part of the solution, not the problem." As the two women continued to talk, Ethan peeked through the window, curious about the visitor. He didn't fully understand what was happening, but he could sense that something important was going on, something that, though he didn't know it at the time, would help shape the world he would grow up in. In the weeks that followed, Sarah and Linda met several times. Each conversation was a journey, sometimes painful, sometimes enlightening, always deep. Sarah shared stories of her journey to adopt Ethan, of the joys and challenges of being an adoptive mother, and of the countless times she had faced prejudice and misunderstanding. Linda, in turn, immersed herself in a process of self-education. She read books on transracial adoption, watched documentaries on race and identity, and joined online support groups for allies in training. Each new piece of knowledge made her realize how much she still had to learn. One day, about 2 months after the incident at the mall, Linda invited Sarah and Ethan to a picnic at the local park. It was a sunny Sunday, and the park was full of families enjoying the good weather. As Sarah helped Ethan balance on a swing, Linda watched, marveling at the evident bond between mother and son. It was then that she noticed a nearby couple watching Sarah and Ethan with disapproving expressions, whispering to each other. Linda felt a wave of indignation rise within her. Without hesitation, she got up and walked over to the couple. "Excuse me," she said, her voice firm but polite. "I couldn't help but notice you were looking at that family. Is there a problem?" The couple looked surprised by Linda's direct approach. The woman, a middle-aged blonde, stammered, "Well, we were just... doesn't it seem a bit odd to you?" Linda took a deep breath, remembering all the conversations she had with Sarah in recent weeks. "Actually, no," she replied. "What I see is a loving mother playing with her son. The color of their skin doesn't define their family." The man frowned. "But surely you have to admit it's unusual. How can we be sure that he's really her son?" Linda finished, feeling a pang of shame as she remembered that she herself had made that assumption not so long ago. She adopted him when he was a baby. But even if she hadn't, what right do we have to judge a family based solely on appearances? The couple exchanged uncomfortable glances. Linda continued, her voice softening. "I know it may seem different from what we're used to seeing, but a mother's love for her child knows no color. Maybe instead of judging, we can learn something from them about what it really means to be a family." Meanwhile, Sarah, who had noticed the interaction, watched with a mix of surprise and gratitude. Seeing Linda stand up for her, educating others, was such a drastic change from that day at the mall that she could hardly believe it. Ethan, unaware of the tension around him, shouted from the swing, "Mommy, look how high I am." Sarah smiled, turning her attention back to her son. "I see, sweetie. You're flying." Linda returned to the picnic spot, feeling both exhausted and invigorated. Sarah looked at her with a grateful smile. "Thank you," she said simply. Linda shook her head. "No, thank you. You've taught me so much in these last few weeks. I'll never stay silent again when I see injustice or prejudice." The two women watched Ethan play, reflecting on how much their lives had changed in such a short time. For Sarah, it was a glimpse of a world where her family could be accepted without question. For Linda, it was the beginning of a new journey as an ally and educator. As summer advanced, Sarah and Linda continued to meet regularly. Their conversations evolved from basic explanations about transracial adoption to deeper discussions about systemic racism, white privilege, and the role of allies in the fight for social justice. One day, while having coffee on Sarah's porch, Linda shared an idea that had been brewing in her mind for weeks. "I was thinking," she began, a little hesitant, "what if we organized a support group for multiracial adoptive families in our community?" Sarah raised her eyebrows, surprised but intrigued. "That would be amazing, Linda. But do you think there's a demand for something like that around here?" Linda nodded enthusiastically. "I've done some research. There are more families like yours in our town than we realize, and many of them face the same challenges you face. I thought we could create a safe space to share experiences, offer support, and educate the broader community." Sarah felt a wave of emotion at the thought. The idea of having a group of people who truly understood her struggles, who could offer support and understanding, was incredibly appealing. "I'd love to be a part of that," she said, her voice full of emotion. "But where do we start?" In the weeks that followed, Sarah and Linda worked tirelessly to bring the support group to life. They reserved a space at the local library for meetings, created flyers and social media posts to spread the word, and even got the local newspaper to run an article about the initiative. The first group meeting, on a Wednesday evening, exceeded all expectations. The library room was packed, with families of all colors and configurations. There were white parents with black children, Asian mothers with Latino children, interracial couples with adopted children, a true celebration of family diversity. Sarah stood at the front of the room, her heart pounding as she prepared to speak. Ethan sat in the front row, playing quietly with a toy car, occasionally looking up at his mother with a proud smile. "Welcome, everyone," Sarah began, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. "When I adopted my son Ethan 5 years ago, I had no idea of the challenges we would face. Not just the normal challenges of parenthood, but the stares, the questions, the assumptions. Sometimes, it felt like we were alone in the world." She paused, looking around the room and seeing nods of understanding on many faces. "But looking at all of you today, I realize we were never really alone. There are so many of us, each with our own unique story, but united by the love we have for our children and the desire to create a better world for them." Linda, sitting next to Sarah, stood up to speak next. "A few months ago, I was part of the problem," she admitted, her voice filled with regret but also determination. "I made harmful assumptions based solely on appearances. But thanks to Sarah's patience and courage, I learned to see beyond appearances and to understand the true meaning of family." The meeting continued for hours, with families sharing their stories, their challenges, and their joys. There were tears and laughter, moments of shared pain and collective celebration. By the end of the night, it was clear to everyone that something special had begun. In the months that followed, the group grew and strengthened. They organized workshops on how to deal with prejudice, counseling sessions for parents considering transracial adoption, and even an annual festival celebrating family diversity that became a beloved event in the community. Sarah watched with pride as Ethan grew, becoming a confident and compassionate boy. He started asking questions about his adoption and racial identity, and Sarah always made an effort to answer with honesty and love. One day, when Ethan was 8 years old, he came home from school with a thoughtful expression. "Mom," he said, sitting next to her on the couch, "today in class, we were talking about families, and I told them about our support group and how you help other families like ours." Sarah smiled, running her hand through Ethan's curly hair. "And what do you think about that, sweetie?" Ethan thought for a moment before replying. "I think it's amazing, Mom. You're helping people understand that love is what makes a family, not the color of your skin." He paused, his blue eyes meeting Sarah's brown ones. "I want to help too. Can I go to the next meeting and talk about what it's like to be an adopted child?" Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes. "Of course you can, my love. I'm so proud of you." That night, as she lay in bed, Sarah reflected on her journey. From the scary day at the mall to the emotional moment when her son expressed his desire to join the cause, it had been a long and sometimes difficult road. But every challenge, every tough conversation, every moment of doubt had been worth it. She thought of Linda, who had become not just a close friend but a fervent ally in the fight against prejudice. She thought of the countless families who had found support and understanding through the group they had created together. And she thought of Ethan, her wonderful son, who was growing into a young man who was aware and compassionate. The world was still not perfect. There would still be looks. There would still be questions. There would still be people who didn't understand. But Sarah knew they were no longer alone on this journey. They had created a community, a network of support and understanding that extended far beyond their small family. As she drifted off to sleep, Sarah smiled to herself. Love, she now knew more than ever, truly knew no color. And with every mind they opened, with every heart they touched, they were building a world where families like theirs could thrive, free from judgment and full of love. The next morning, Sarah woke up to the sound of Ethan humming in the kitchen. She went downstairs to find him trying to make pancakes, the kitchen a mess of flour and cracked eggs. "Good morning, Mom," Ethan exclaimed, his face lit up with a smile. "I wanted to make breakfast for you." Sarah laughed, grabbing a cloth to clean up some of the mess. That's so sweet, honey. Thank you. As they worked together to salvage breakfast, Sarah couldn't help but think of how simple moments like this were precious. It was in these everyday moments that the true meaning of family revealed itself. Later that day, Sarah received an unexpected call. It was Ethan's school principal, asking to schedule a meeting. Sarah's heart immediately began to race. Years of experience had conditioned her to expect the worst. In the meeting, however, the principal surprised Sarah with an unexpected proposal. "Mrs. Jenkins," she began, "Ethan mentioned the support group you lead for multiracial adoptive families. We were thinking, would you be interested in giving a talk to our students and staff about family diversity?" Sarah was momentarily speechless. It was an opportunity she had never imagined, the chance to educate an entire generation of children and educators about the beauty and challenges of families like hers. "I would love to," Sarah replied, feeling a mix of nervousness and excitement. "But I'd like to suggest something. What if, instead of just me talking, we organized a panel with different types of families? We could have adoptive families, same-sex parent families, single-parent families, really show the kids the diversity that exists in our community." The principal's eyes lit up at the idea. "That would be wonderful, Mrs. Jenkins. Let's make it happen." In the weeks that followed, Sarah worked tirelessly to organize the panel. She recruited families from the support group, worked with the school to develop an age-appropriate curriculum, and even helped create an informational booklet for parents. The day of the panel arrived, and the school auditorium was packed. Sarah was nervous but felt comforted by Ethan's presence in the front row, giving her an encouraging thumbs up. When it was her turn to speak, Sarah took a deep breath and began. Family. It's a simple word, but with such a deep meaning. For some of you, family might mean a mom and a dad who look like you. For others, it might mean two dads or two moms. For some, like in the case of my son Ethan and me, it might mean a mom and a son who don't share the same skin color, but who share an unconditional love. She continued, sharing her story, the challenges they faced, and the joys they experienced. She talked about the prejudice they encountered and how they worked to educate others. And she talked about love, the love that overcomes all barriers, that knows no color or biology. When the panel ended, there was a moment of silence before the auditorium erupted in applause. Children and adults approached the panelists, asking questions, sharing their own stories, some even crying as they expressed how touched they felt. A little girl approached Sarah, her big, curious eyes looking up at her. "Mrs. Jenkins," she said shyly, "I'm adopted too. Sometimes people ask strange questions about my family. How do you deal with that?" Sarah knelt to be at the girl's level. "Well, sweetie, sometimes people ask questions because they don't understand. But that gives us the chance to teach them. You can tell them that family is about love, not about looking alike. And if someone is mean, remember, that's their problem, not yours. You are loved, and your family is perfect just the way it is." The girl smiled and hugged Sarah impulsively before running back to her parents. That night, at home, Ethan was unusually quiet during dinner. Sarah watched him with concern. "Is everything okay, sweetie? You're so quiet." Ethan played with his food for a moment before looking up. "Mom, today at school, after the panel, some of my friends asked a lot of questions. They wanted to know what it's like to be adopted, if I feel different because I have a mom of another color. At first, I wasn't sure what to say." Sarah felt her heart tighten. She had always known this day would come, the day when Ethan would have to navigate these complex waters on his own. "And how did you feel about those questions, sweetie?" Ethan thought for a moment. "At first, I felt a little confused. But then I remembered all the things you've taught me, all the stories we've heard in the support group. And I realized that our family is special, not because we're different, but because we love each other so much." Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes. "You're absolutely right, Ethan. And what did you say to your friends?" "I told them that being adopted means I was chosen especially by you, that love is more important than the color of your skin, and that our family is perfect just the way it is." Ethan paused, a shy smile forming on his face. "And you know what, Mom? I think they understood. Tommy even said he wished his family was as cool as ours." Sarah stood up and hugged Ethan tightly, her heart overflowing with pride and love. "You're amazing. You know that. I'm so proud of you." In the days that followed, Sarah noticed a subtle but significant change in the school and the community. Parents approached her in the supermarket or the park, thanking her for the talk and sharing how it had opened their eyes to different types of families. Teachers reported that children were having more inclusive and respectful conversations about family diversity. One Saturday, while Sarah and Ethan were shopping at the same mall where it had all begun years ago, they ran into Linda. She was accompanied by a young black woman and a biracial baby. "Sarah, Ethan," Linda called, waving enthusiastically. "It's so good to see you here. Let me introduce you to my daughter, Jessica, and my granddaughter, Lily." Sarah warmly greeted Jessica, admiring the sleeping baby in her arms. "She's beautiful," Sarah said softly. Linda, with tears in her eyes, looked at Sarah. "You know, if it weren't for you, for everything you taught me, I might have reacted very differently when Jessica told us about her boyfriend and the pregnancy. But thanks to you, I was able to embrace my daughter and granddaughter with unconditional love." The two women hugged, aware of the long journey they had taken since that first tense encounter. Ethan, meanwhile, was making funny faces at the baby, who had woken up and was watching him with wide eyes. That night, after Ethan went to bed, Sarah sat on her porch, reflecting on the day's events and the years that had passed. She thought about all the lives that had been touched, all the minds that had been opened, all the hearts that had been transformed. She thought of Ethan, her brave and compassionate son, who faced the world with a wisdom beyond his years. She thought of Linda, who had transformed from an antagonist into a dear friend and ally. She thought of all the families in the support group, each with their own unique story of love and challenge. The path had not been easy. There were days of doubt, nights of tears, moments of anger and frustration. But there was also joy, growth, and a sense of purpose that Sarah had never experienced before. As the stars shone above, Sarah made a silent promise to herself and to Ethan. She promised to keep fighting, to keep educating, to keep loving. She promised to create a world where families like theirs wouldn't be seen as different or strange, but simply as families. Because in the end, she knew love is what makes a family. And with every heart they opened, with every mind they touched, they were building a world where families like theirs could thrive, free from judgment and full of love. Because in the end, love is what makes a family. And their love, the love of their unique and wonderful family, was changing the world, one heart at a time.